going to spend some time talking about this new book coming out, Surprised by Doubt, How Disillusionment Can Invite Us into a Deeper Faith. This is another great opportunity to learn a little bit more about your Christian faith, to embrace the issue of the uncertainty that, again, as you research it, will lead you to greater confidence. And the author, actually the co-author of this, is Joshua Chatraw, who's been with us before. We talked about his book, Telling a Better Story, How to Talk About God in a Skeptical Age, individual that has been with us. And this particular book is one that I think you will find very helpful because, after all, everyone has doubt. Sometimes people become a little discouraged when they hear that, but that is certainly the case. And he, as you might remember, is the executive director of the Center for Public Christianity, also the theologian in residence at Holy Trinity Anglican Church. Matter of fact, John Yates, I think I knew him from the days when he was actually up there in the Washington, D.C. area, is also there as residence at the Holy Trinity Anglican Church, and also co-author of Apologetics of the Cross and Cultural Engagement, co-editor of the History of Apologetics, and author of this book, Surprised by Doubt. Some great endorsements from Karen Swallow Pryor's been on the program, and even one from Justin Brierly, who was on with us last week. So, first of all, welcome back, Josh, to the program.
Yeah, it's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Let's begin get into this issue of doubt. You start the book by saying that sometimes you can actually see people's facial expression change when you say, well, yes, I have doubts. And you're thinking, no, you're the smart guy. You're supposed to never have doubts. But I don't think you could not have doubts given the assault that has been taking place against Christianity over the many certainly centuries and even the last couple of decades. And so in some respects, doubt begins to be an opportunity to then invite an investigation. And on the other side, oftentimes you come out with greater confidence.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think having theologians or apologists say, hey, I'd never have any doubts is actually very helpful. It's not only, I don't think that's actually true, especially not in my case, but I don't think it's actually helpful. I found pastorally as I'm talking to somebody about their doubt. Often, if that's the case, they begin wondering, well, as they search deeper, how come I still have these doubts? Is there something wrong with me? Because I'm doing the research, I'm praying, and yet I'm still at times, kind of eaten away by these doubts. And so I think right away in the book, we wanted to say, hey, living in the period of time that we live in, where there's different kind of plausibility structures, or there's different ways to see the world all around us. We live around people who think very differently than us as Christians, and who are still smart people. And to say, hey, you should never have any doubts, I just think sets people up actually for ultimate failure. To say that, hey, we don't actually want to celebrate doubts, but we recognize that doubts in our kind of secular age today is something that's going to happen. It's going to happen to our kids. And so not to be kind of not to be completely in despair when those come, or come for your grandkids or your kids.
Sure. And you co-author this book with Jack Carson, and Jack talks about the fact that, it seemed very easy to believe in Christianity when I was surrounded by friends who were all devout believers. And I've talked about this before. They're what are oftentimes referred to as plausibility structures. I mean, Christianity seems more true when you're in church than it does when you're in the workaday world. And Christianity seems more true when you're in America than when you're maybe in Bangladesh. Because you are surrounded by individuals that are sort of reinforcing your views. But that being said, we send young people off to college all the time, and we do a Mind Games conference every year that we promote. And even when I first joined Probe Ministries, back in 1976, we had a brochure that said, when your kids go off to college, will they lose their faith? So that was true before probably you were born. It's been true before a lot of our listeners were born. But it's, I think, also true that if you have some doubts, or you are maybe given some false confidence, it's easy to rattle somebody's cage and as a result send you into sometimes even deconstruction, but certainly into a spiral of doubt.
Yeah, that's right. And I think one of the things that sometimes happens here is we want to tell someone, or if we're trying to help someone through this, to say, well, just look at the evidence. Just look at the evidence. Well, oftentimes they have found themselves, especially 20 or 30-year-olds, actually in a kind of an internet rabbit hole, or kind of a spiral,
yes.
where they've looked at the Christian evidences, but guess what? There is an atheist website that has their evidences too, and it just becomes very confusing. And so to then say, well, just look at the evidence again, we need to give them more than that. And what we try to do in the book is to say, really, there's kind of three things, and we're getting this from C.S. Lewis. There's three things that we would encourage people to do. And that is, one is look at Christianity. Look at it. There's certain things like the resurrection of Jesus, and there's really good historical resources to think through that as a historical event. So look at Christianity. Look at the person of Christ. But also, the second thing that we encourage people to do when they're going through doubts is to look through Christianity, to look through the gospel, to see how it makes sense of life, how it makes sense, and compare it with other perspectives, because everybody's looking through the world through some lens. And so we're saying, look through the gospel, look through the world, and look at meaning and value and morals in light of the gospel, and then compare with other systems. Look through Christianity. But then the third aspect is to step into Christianity, not just to treat Christianity as some kind of abstract logical system or some kind of worldview experiment, but to actually look through the really deep practices of the church that the church has given us over the last 2,000 years, and to step into it, to step into worship, to step into lament, to step into actually deep prayer, and so to learn some maybe really old practices, but new practices in our information age, where we're so busy that sometimes we just kind of want a quick fix to eliminate doubts, where it's actually we have to develop new patterns of living to deal with these doubts.
Again, the book is divided into a couple sections. Part 1, the attic, which we'll come back and talk about a little bit more. Part 2, outside the house. And then Part 3, the main floor. And that's where we talk about looking at, looking through, and stepping in. Some great material, and I think you will find the book very helpful. And Josh, for just a minute, let's, if we can, talk about the rooms of the house. One is the attic. Don't want to spend a lot of time there, but if you grew up in attic Christianity, maybe shaped the way you see this. And I see young people sometimes living in this sort of narrow view, and so they think everything has been answered in terms of every possible question of science and apologetics and history. And all it takes is for them to go off to the university and have one particular challenge that they weren't prepared for, and that sometimes can dismantle their faith. And so one of the things you're talking about there, you even quote from, of course, Mark Noll's Scandal of the American Mind, is there's been sort of almost an anti-intellectualism sometimes in the evangelical world, hasn't there?
Yeah, there's a kind of, on one hand, there can be a kind of, just believe, and so then when you face challenges, that doesn't help. And so that's the kind of anti-intellectualism. And then there's a kind of quasi-intellectualism, which I would say is kind of acts like, well, we have all the answers. Yeah. There's no mysteries left to explore. And if you just kind of follow this kind of basic logic, it solves everything. And everybody on the outside they're just dumb. And we've got all the answers. Well, when you actually interact with some sophisticated people who are secular, you realize, well, they're not all dumb. And there's some things about Christianity that indeed are a mystery, and and that is actually part of the faith. In fact, God, read the book of Job. We don't get all of the answers that we would like. And yet, in the kind of mysteries of faith, also, they also reveal things too, even though we don't know how they're all connected. And so it's important to kind of have proper expectations about how far reason can get us. It's important to have proper expectations that we don't caricature people outside that our young people are going to meet, and we don't demonize them. All of these things are actually important parts of keeping people in the faith that we love, and we want to see them walk with Jesus and live with him in eternity. So these are all important parts of setting them up on the right course when they're young.
Well, again, that's the attic. The other is outside the house, which gets into the new atheism. And I might skip that just because we were privileged last week to have one of the people that endorsed your book, Justin Brierley, on his new book, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, and pointing out that a lot of these arguments of the new atheist are kind of falling flat, and you're seeing all sorts of people who you wouldn't have even expected to show an interest in the Christian faith to actually be more interested. But since you did spend some time in what is called the main floor, well, walk us through a little bit more about looking through, and stepping in, because that three-part principle is one that's really key to the last half of your book. Yeah.
Well, we think evidences and arguments for the Christian faith are important. So there's been a trend amongst some theologians and philosophers of Christianity to say, those traditional arguments or evidences for Christianity, we don't need those. We actually think that's a mistake. We think that they're important. And if you take an issue, for instance, like the resurrection of Jesus, if you actually look at it, you actually look at the evidence, there's these common points that almost all historians agree on, that the body was not found,
right?
That he was killed, and that the early disciples proclaimed that he had rose from the dead. Now, whether you're an atheist or an agnostic historian, almost all historians agree on those things. Western historians agree on those things, and they do so because there's really good evidence for those 3 points. And then from those 3 historical points, you say, now what's the best explanation? And that's what we do in one of the chapters in the book. And we believe the best explanation is actually that Jesus rose from the dead. We agree with the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, but also looking at the person of Christ, how the genius of Christ and his teachings that are remarkable and have shaped the Western world, and really have shaped even secular ethics. Even somebody who doesn't believe in the Gospels have been impacted and have had their moral intuition shaped by the person of Jesus. And so looking at Jesus and looking at the resurrection, we think are incredible apologetic arguments for the faith. But, and this is important, but often how we receive those arguments is going to be tied with the kind of posture of our heart going into those.
Right.
And so, and how we attend to the world around us, what kind of stories we live out. And so that's where the last part that I mentioned before comes in, that it's not just these kind of abstract arguments, but it's the arguments that are pointing to the person and story of Christ, and then living out those ways that he gives us, not sometimes the ways that the church has at times in its history corrupted those ways and or has failed to pass down the practices of the faith, but in the fullest expressions of them and living them out through lives of prayer, of service to others, of being in nature and reflecting on God's glory through his creation, and slowing down and meditating on Scripture. All of these practices, which the church has a deep history of, is actually a way to sustain faith, and we need them more than ever in the midst of kind of our cultural climate today.
Sure. And again, looking through, of course, you have a whole section there, wagering wisely. And of course, that's the Pascal wager. And of course, also just looking at all the commonalities like beauty and justice and the rest. But I think back to the point you're making, the last one is stepping in. I still can't believe, now what? What do I do when I'm still struggling with a particular doubt? Well, I think, first of all, you need to be committed to trying to investigate that. And William Lane Craig's been on the program before, who I suspect you know. says, one of the things he's found is that when people have a doubt, he says, I encourage them to go and research that. And oftentimes then at the end, when they find the answer, they have a greater confidence. And so the doubt leads to confidence. And just as exercise and breaking down some of the muscle tissue gives you stronger muscles, so exercising your faith gives you stronger faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and finding the right kind of community to do that in. A community that is going to say, "Hey, bring your questions and bring your doubts, and let's go through this together." And I think that's an important part of the process, because of course some people are going to go looking for these answers, but not in the right type of community.
Right.
And so the right type of community that fears the Lord, who are humble. Those are important aspects in this process as well.
Well, let me just mention that the book is entitled Surprised by Doubt. And nearly almost said surprised by joy a few times here, because you can understand what it's playing off of. But I think it's wonderful. And it would be, I think, a great Bible study. First of all, it'd be very good for individuals struggling with this. It'd be something you might want to hand to a young person struggling or thinking through or asking skeptical questions. But Josh, it seems to me that because you and Jack have put this together in this kind of format, I think it could be a small group study, and it could be something that could be used to really encourage people to make sure they're looking for answers, looking in the right places and in the right community.
Yeah, we try to, on one hand, make it brief enough and to the point enough that people could use it in that way. And then we left the kind of scholarly paper trail in the end notes. So it's one of those books that if you want to jump off and go deeper, we point in that direction. But on the other hand, if you don't have an academic background at all, we wrote this for a lay audience to understand these issues and to grapple with their doubt, with their disillusionment with the church. And I would just say, I would want to mention, I often find that it's people in their 50s and 60s, and they're trying to help their kids or grandkids kind of work through this, and they realize that their kids and grandkids are just not in the same place. They don't have the same assumptions. They're not approaching the issue of religion or Christianity from the same place. And as serving at Holy Trinity Anglican Church, we talked a lot about this. How do we help our grandkids and our kids actually in a way that's going to be persuasive to them? So we wrote this book with all those groups in mind, and also really with years of teaching at university and talking to a lot of students who are struggling.
It's very good. Again, Surprised by Doubt. It is published by Brazos Press, which is a division of Baker. It's coming out later this month. And so, Josh, thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, hope you appreciated the conversation we had here today. And don't forget that if you would like more information about what we're talking about, you can find it at the website pointofview.net. That's all we have for today. We look forward to seeing you next time right here on Point of View Highlights.